You're eager to create awesome renderings like this in Vray for SketchUp. But wait, don't make the mistake I see so many self-taught Vray users make. Hey guys, Alex here from SketchUp School, the place where professionals go when they're serious about learning SketchUp. Time and time again, I hear about frustrating roadblocks that trip people up in Vray. And 9 times out of 10, their struggles can be traced back to one crucial step they skip. A couple of years ago, we shared this crucial step in our Getting Started with Vray video, which now has over 500,000 views. And now, we're back with an update of that original video with some pointers about how things have changed in the latest version of Vray, plus a new bonus tip for you. So what's this missing step? I'll give you a hint. You do it before you even think about touching a single button in Vray. That's right, it's not part of Vray at all, which is why I think everybody misses it. So what do you need to do before you get started with Vray to set yourself up for success with your renderings? You need to make sure your SketchUp model is render ready. To do that, I've created an easy to follow 5-part checklist, the same one we start off our Vray for SketchUp course with. And now, I'm gonna share it with you. Now before I get too far along, I need to quickly mention that this video isn't for beginner SketchUp users or people completely unaware of how rendering works in SketchUp. You should at least be familiar with the concepts we cover in our Getting Started with SketchUp video, which goes over some of the fundamental skills you need to know, as well as our How to Render in SketchUp video, which outlines how the entire rendering process works. Don't worry, I've also written up some notes that will make it easy for you to review everything we're about to cover, and you can find a link to those in the cards. Okay, back to our list. Starting with number 1, orient your model. Vray is responsible for shining light into your model. And out of the box, it will render realistic sunlight into your SketchUp scene. But if you open Vray and find that the sunlight isn't shining in the direction you want, you've made a costly mistake. There are 2 things that you should have already done in SketchUp first, and failing to do them before you get to Vray causes problems later. Now, I should note, if you're using Vray 5, there is a new feature that allows you to adjust the position of the sun after the fact in Vray. But even for Vray 5 users, I recommend following these steps, and I'll talk about why in a second. So what do I mean by orient your model? That means aligning your model correctly in the north-south direction, so the angle of the sun and shadows in SketchUp is accurate, because Vray will automatically look to SketchUp to tell it where the sun is. To do that, all you need to know is that by default, the green axis in SketchUp is pointing north, plus or minus a few degrees depending on the location of your project, which means that the sun is positioned along the red axis, plus or minus a few degrees depending on the date. So the first thing you should do early in the process of building your SketchUp model is correctly orient your model based off the axes. And the second thing you need to do is tell SketchUp where the sun is along the east, west, or red axis. To do this, turn on your shadows and use the date and time sliders to get an idea of how the light will shine across your scene. Even though you can edit the sun's angle in Vray 5, I still always recommend orienting your model correctly in SketchUp first, because it's a helpful reference to have while you're building out your model, seeing how the sun and shade will move across your design at different times of the year and throughout the day. Now, if you need to be even more accurate in terms of the angle of the sun, you can use the Add Location feature to geolocate your model to an exact place in the world. And you can use the Solar North extension to show you true north before orienting your SketchUp model. All right, your model is oriented and you've got a nice angle for the sunshine and shadows set up for your rendering. The next item on our Render Ready checklist is number 2, organize your file. When you create a final rendering in Vray, you click a button to render and then wait anywhere from a couple of minutes to several hours to see the final result. There are settings in Vray to help you minimize the time each render takes. But when it comes to excessively long render times, the root of the problem starts with an unorganized SketchUp model. For faster render times and faster changes between renders, here are a few tips for organizing your model before you get to Vray. As I mentioned earlier, you should be familiar with everything we covered in our Getting Started with SketchUp video, so you already know to make everything a group or component as you build your model. In order to make your model render ready, you'll want to assign those groups and components to tags based on what you'll want to hide or show in your final rendering. For example, hiding off-camera elements that won't show up in the final image is an easy way to speed up your rendering times. But another tip that can really help speed things up as you're working on your rendering is having tags set up so you can hide some on-camera details early in the rendering process to speed up your test renders. Then, when you're dialing in the final look, you can turn those elements back on. This can help save a ton of time as you iterate through changes in Vray. Lastly, you can also use tags to hide and show different design options to help you preview how each will look in the context of your realistic rendering. All right, once your file is organized, you're ready to move on to number 3, master your materials. Often, as you model in SketchUp, you'll be adding colors and materials along the way. Then you might be excited to jump into Vray to make those materials more realistic looking. But working with your materials in Vray can be really time consuming if you don't plan ahead in SketchUp. Here's why. All the materials you add and test out along the way in SketchUp end up creating a long and often confusing list to work with later in Vray. Some materials on this list aren't actually being used in the model, and many have names that aren't very helpful. You can end up wasting a lot of time trying to find and change the materials you need to edit. So if you invest some time into creating a few good habits in SketchUp up front, your future self will definitely thank you.
Great, Scott! I came back to warn you. You gotta fix your materials.
I just told them.
Thank you.
Here are a few things to keep in mind when working with materials. First and foremost, name every color or material that you add to your model. It's much easier to edit all of your materials later in Vray when you're scrolling through a list of specific names rather than generic ones. Also, naming your materials disciplines you to use the right materials on the right surfaces. For example, if you have white walls and white cabinets, and you paint both with the same generic white in SketchUp, you'll have trouble later if you want the cabinets to be glossy and the walls to be flat, since you won't be able to edit them as separate materials in Vray. Instead, you should create 2 different whites and name them something like white wall paint and white cabinet finish, enabling you to differentiate them later in Vray. That said, there are also times where you'll want to use a single material in SketchUp. Perhaps you have a few different metal surfaces in your model, and while they're made of different materials in the real world, maybe they all look similar enough that you could just use the same chrome material on all of them. That's a huge win when you get to Vray, since you'll only have to edit the single chrome material to make everything shiny. Once you're done adding and naming your colors and materials in SketchUp, make sure you purge any unused materials. SketchUp remembers every one that you've tried, even if you've replaced it with some of the other options. Purging will shrink your list down to only the materials that are being used, and it will give you less to scroll through later in Vray. Beyond staying organized, I've also got 3 bonus material tips for you. First, if you import your own image and use it as a material, pay attention to the resolution of the image. Low resolution materials may look blurry in your final rendering, and high resolution materials can really slow down your render times. Ideally, use an image with a resolution that's close to what its resolution will be in the final rendering. Second, when you don't have the right material in SketchUp, use a color as your proxy. Later in Vray, you can easily swap that color for a render-ready material out of Vray's library. And third, if you paint a material on the wrong side of a SketchUp face, it may not render correctly. In your Styles panel, under Faces, set them to display monochrome. That way you can see if any blue faces are facing out. For any that are, right-click on them and pick the option for Reverse Face. Then switch back to Shaded with Textures mode and make sure your material is added to the white face that is now properly facing out. All right, now that you've mastered your materials, the next item on our Render Ready checklist is number 4, add important details. In real life, the world is full of beveled edges, reliefs, and other design details. To get a realistic rendering out of Vray, your SketchUp model needs to have the same attention to detail. Here are 3 specific things to look out for. First, Vray renders faces, not edges. So if you take this cabinet, for example, you can't just use edges for the door front style. You need to get in there with the move or push-pull tools to add some depth. Second, even when things touch in the real world, there are often small little gaps. Adding these across your scene can have a big impact on your rendering later. And third, SketchUp creates hard edges and corners, but in the real world, things tend to be beveled or rounded. Use the Follow Me tool or the Frito Corner extension to add these subtle but realistic details. Now, speaking of adding details, that leads us to the next item on the checklist. Number 5, mind your polygons. Perhaps the most important thing you can do in SketchUp, the one that will have the biggest impact on the quality and speed of your renderings in Vray later, is to mind your polygons. So what does that mean? That means optimizing the level of detail in your model by being mindful of the number of polygons you're working with. To do that, let's quickly review some fundamental concepts. As you may already know, everything in SketchUp is made up of endpoints, edges, and faces, and those faces make polygons. So this simple cube is made up of just 6 polygons, whereas this sphere is actually made up of a mesh of 288 polygons, all stitched together to give the appearance of a curved surface. But here's the thing, the same sphere could also be made with 144 polygons, or it could be made with 3072 polygons. So which version is ideal? When it comes to rendering the sphere with Vray, there's a trade-off to make. Less polygons means faster render times. However, it can also mean lower quality. For example, the lower poly sphere looks faceted in this rendering. On the other end of the spectrum, more polygons gives you higher quality, but at the expense of longer render times. What's worse is your SketchUp model also slows down when you have too many polygons in it, which can be a problem when you're trying to edit it. The goal then is to find the middle ground, a polygon count that gives you the quality you want without needlessly slowing down your rendering. So choosing the best level of detail for this sphere is easy, right? We should pick the one in the middle. It looks good enough and has a relatively low polygon count. Well, not necessarily. It depends on the distance between the sphere and the camera. So for this shot, the middle sphere is a good choice. But what if we zoom out? It's hard to tell a difference in the quality between the three. So now the lowest poly sphere is a better choice. And what if we zoom in really close? Now we're seeing clear differences in the quality, and the highest poly sphere is the right choice. But you don't render spheres for a living, so let's apply this to what you need to do. First, as we saw with the sphere, make sure you manage your polygon count based on how visible the objects will be in the final render. For example, round corners for objects that are closer to the camera, and maybe skip the ones that are further away. And for any object that you will use more than once, make it a component before copying it around your model. Each copy will still increase your polygon count, but Vray can render component instances, or copies of that component, much faster than groups or non-group geometry. And for components you get from sites like the 3D Warehouse, be sure to comparison shop. When you're searching for a particular thing, for all the best looking options, start by trying the one with fewer polygons relative to the others. Now, when you followed all the rules for managing your level of detail, but you find you still need to include higher polygon objects to get the quality you want, just know that there's a feature in Vray called proxies that can help. That's when you turn high polygon SketchUp components into lower polygon versions, or proxies, that keep your SketchUp model light while shortening your rendering times, all while allowing Vray to still render the higher polygon version into the final image. So you can have your cake and eat it too. Okay, we've made it through the main points in our checklist. But as I mentioned earlier, I've got a bonus tip for you. Since we published the previous version of this video, we've come up with one more way to help you take your Vray renderings to the next level by being mindful of one more thing in SketchUp before you get to Vray. Use high quality models. If you've done everything we've outlined so far, then your model will be set up for success when you get to rendering in Vray. However, one thing that can hamper the realism of your final rendering is making the mistake of using lower quality 3D models for the objects you need to add to your scene. By low quality, I mean objects that haven't been modeled with a realistic attention to detail, or objects that have low resolution, unrealistic, or inaccurately applied materials. So how do you avoid that? First, if you're using the latest version of Vray 5, then you'll have access to Cosmos, a curated 3D library of high-quality, render-ready models of things like furniture, trees, cars, people, and more. To use them, just click on the Cosmos icon on your Vray toolbar. Browse to find the object you want, click to download, then click again to import. It will be attached to your Move Tool cursor. Click to set it down, then hit the Escape key when you don't want to place any more instances of the model. By default, the object will display without much detail, keeping your polygon count low, and the materials won't show up. But when you render, you'll see the full level of detail with realistic materials. Now, if you're using an older version of Vray or looking for something that you can't find in the Cosmos library, another option is to look in SketchUp's 3D Warehouse. But if you're searching through the millions of models available to you on there, know that many of them are low quality, and trying to find good ones can be overwhelming. But I've got a few tricks that can help you filter down to the good stuff. One thing you can do is, when you find a model that looks like it's pretty good, click through to the Model Details page. From there, look to see if that model is found in any other collections. If so, click on a promising looking one to see the models in there. Now you're looking at a curated version of the 3D Warehouse. Other designers like you have taken the time to find gems so you don't have to. To find more curated collections from other SketchUp users, you can do the same thing again, clicking through to a Model's Details page and clicking through to another new collection. And along the way, be sure to save models or collections to your own collections so that you can find them later. And if you find some really good looking stuff, click on the author's name to see everything else they've created and their saved collections. Jackpot! Just know that when you use a model from the 3D warehouse, its materials will rarely be set up to render realistically in V-Ray. So you'll have to spend a little time configuring those settings. Next, you should know that the 3D warehouse isn't the only place to find high-quality SketchUp files. There are dozens of other websites that offer 3D models you can use in SketchUp. Too many to list here, but I'll add links to some of my favorites in the notes. And lastly, know that you're not limited to using only SketchUp files. That's right, it's possible to import other 3D file formats. While there are a number of ways to do that, which we don't have time to cover extensively right now, one easy solution that I recommend is an extension called Transmuter, which makes for quick and pretty seamless importing of other 3D file formats for using in your V-Ray for SketchUp renderings. And once you realize you're not limited to only SketchUp files, that greatly expands your options for finding the best quality models to add to your scene. Don't worry, I've added links to some of these other popular 3D model websites in the notes as well. Now there's just one thing to remember that goes along with this bonus tip, and it goes back to one of our previous tips. Don't forget to mind your polygons. Because if you're not careful, all these high quality models could slow things down in your model and your renderings. So be sure to pay attention to polygon counts in the 3D warehouse, opting for models with lower polygon counts if you're choosing between two nice looking options. Or take advantage of extensions like Transmuter or Skimp, which can be used to reduce the complexity of the model without losing visible quality. And that's it! You made it through all the steps to make sure your model is render ready. Are you ready to learn more about how to take your V-Ray renderings to the next level? From here, it's definitely possible to learn everything on your own. But if you can't afford to waste any time or pick up bad habits, I recommend checking out our video course library. It's filled with $8,700 worth of SketchUp courses exclusively for professionals, including our comprehensive V-Ray course. Head over to the SketchUp School website and try our courses for free. And if you're not ready to try our courses yet, be sure to at least check out this playlist. It's filled with a bunch of helpful tutorials, tricks, and tips to help you streamline your V-Ray workflow and achieve great rendering results. Until next time, happy sketching!
Great Scott! I came back to warn you.